The sound of the diesel engine was the first thing that broke the morning's peace. It was 6:42 a.m., a Tuesday in early October. The air held that specific brittle chill that promises a warm afternoon, but for now it was sharp enough to make the steam from my coffee cup dance in frantic, ghost-like spirals. I was standing at the kitchen window, looking out over the back 40 acres, a habit ingrained over 20 years of solitude since Martha passed. The sound was wrong. It wasn't the distant hum of the highway or the chug of Mr. Henderson's tractor. 3 properties over, this was close. It was on my land. I walked to the front of the house, coffee still in hand, and looked down the long gravel drive that connected my home to the main county road. My drive was not the source of the noise. Then I looked to the left, towards the old access lane. It was a simple dirt and gravel track, about 12 feet wide, that cut across the northern edge of my property. It had been there since my grandfather's time, a shortcut for the half-dozen homes in the newer development to the west to get to Ridge Road without having to go 2 miles around. And it was my land, explicitly and unambiguously detailed in the deed filed with the county in 1958, but I never minded them using it. It was a neighborly thing to do. End quote. Today, however, there was a bright yellow road grader parked on it, its engine growling, its blades scraping away the familiar surface of dirt and stone. A crew of men in orange vests were spreading fresh, black asphalt from the back of a large truck. Leading them, gesturing with an imperial sweep of her arm, was Eleanor Vance. She was the president of the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association, a position she wielded not like a gavel, but like a scepter. She wore a pristine white pantsuit, a truly baffling choice for a construction site, and pointed at various spots on the ground, as if directing troops into battle. She hadn't seen me. I watched for a full 5 minutes as they methodically erased my property line, burying the survey markers my father had hammered into the earth himself under a steaming layer of tar and aggregate. I took a slow sip of my coffee. It was still hot. I took out my phone and began recording, the video steady. The lens focused on Eleanor's face as she issued her commands. Finally, I walked outside. I didn't hurry. I just walked down my porch steps and across the dew-wet grass until I was standing at the edge of the new encroaching blacktop. The air smelled of hot tar and diesel fumes. Eleanor finally noticed me. A triumphant, predatory smile spread across her face. "Good morning, Arthur," she called out, her voice carrying an artificial brightness that always set my teeth on edge. "Wonderful, isn't it? The board and I decided it was high time we improved this unsightly path. It's going to increase property values for everyone." I said nothing. I just stood there, my phone still recording, held casually at my side. She walked towards me, her heels sinking slightly into the soft shoulder of her new road. "As of 8 a.m. tomorrow, this will be a private toll access road for residents of Oak Ridge Estates only. We're installing an automated gate at the entrance on Ridge Road. Each household will get a transponder for a nominal monthly fee. It's all in the new bylaws addendum. Very official." She gestured back at the road, a monument to her own authority. "This is HOA property now." I finally lowered my gaze from her face to the road, then back to her. I took another sip of coffee. "Eleanor," I said, my voice quiet but clear over the rumble of the machinery. "This lane is on my property. It is not, and has never been, part of the Oak Ridge HOA. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before snapping back into place. Harder this time. "Don't be ridiculous, Arthur. Everyone has used this path for 20 years. Historic use creates an easement. It's a community asset. The board voted. It's done." She crossed her arms, a gesture of finality. If you try to interfere with this official HOA project, I will have you fined for obstruction. And if you persist, I'll have the sheriff remove you. We have a budget for legal fees. I assure you it's much larger than yours. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply nodded slowly, took one last look at the fresh, black scar they had carved into my land, and turned back toward my house. Her laughter followed me, sharp and certain. It was the laugh of someone who had never lost a battle, because she had only ever picked fights with people too tired, too intimidated, or too poor to fight back. As I stepped back onto my porch, I stopped and looked over my shoulder. She was still watching me, her expression one of pure, unadulterated victory. I raised my coffee cup in a small, ironic salute. She had no idea. She had no idea what she had just done. She thought she was paving a road. What she was actually doing was laying the foundation for her own ruin, and she was paying for the materials herself. But before I tell you what I did next, I should probably explain. This wasn't about a strip of land. It was never just about the land. It was about the slow, creeping tyranny of people like Eleanor Vance, people who mistake the rule book for a weapon, and their own opinion for the law. And it was about the quiet, meticulous pleasure of using the rules, the real rules. The ones written in ink and filed with the county clerk to restore order. I am a retired civil engineer. For 42 years I worked for one of the largest land development firms in the state. My specialty was subdivision design and infrastructure planning. I didn't just draw lines on a map. I wrote the legal descriptions for deeds. I drafted the covenants, conditions, and restrictions of the CC&Rs that form the very backbone of homeowner associations. I navigated the labyrinth of county zoning laws, state environmental regulations, and federal land use statutes. I knew how to read a survey plat the way a composer reads a sheet of music. I understood that a property line is not a suggestion. It is a mathematical and legal fact. For a living, I built the very systems Eleanor Vance now thought she controlled. I had been a widower for 20 years, and my work, my precision, was the world I had left. I lived a quiet life. I bothered no one. I asked only to be left alone in the peace. My wife Martha and I had built on this land. Eleanor Vance had moved into the Oak Ridge development about 5 years ago. It was a newer subdivision, built on what used to be the old Miller farm adjacent to my property. She was from out of state, carried an air of East Coast money. And within 6 months, she had orchestrated a coup on the HOA board. The previous board had been a relaxed affair, mostly concerned with organizing the annual summer picnic. Eleanor transformed it. She was a whirlwind of special assessments, new regulations, and violation notices. She measured the height of people's grass with a ruler. She dictated the acceptable shades of beige for mailbox posts. She fined Mr. Henderson for a non-compliant weather vanier, classic rooster his father had made that had been spinning on his barn roof for 50 years before the HOA even existed. She was a performative tyrant. Her power was derived from public spectacle. Board meetings became theatrical productions where she would publicly shame residents for minor infractions. She created a labyrinthine system of fines and appeals, a system where she was the prosecutor, judge, and jury. Most people just paid the fines. It was easier. It was a few $100s to make the problem go away. I knew this because I had paid them myself. 2 years ago, she sent me a notice. A tree on my property, a grand old oak whose branches extended over the fence line, was dropping leaves into the pristine swimming pool of her new best friend on the board. I was in violation of the aesthetic nuisance clause of the HOA bylaws. My property, of course, was not part of the HOA. I was not subject to its bylaws. I could have fought it. I could have sent a letter from a lawyer. Instead, I wrote a check for the $200 fine. I also paid the $50 late fee she tacked on a month later. I sent both via certified mail and kept the receipts, the green signature cards, and the original violation notice. I filed them away. A year after that, another notice arrived. My fence, the one separating my land from the HOA common area, was apparently half an inch taller than the 6 feet stipulated in their rules. It was the same fence that had been there for 30 years. I received a $500 fine. I paid it. I kept the receipts. On paper, it looked like capitulation. On paper, it looked like I was just another resident she had successfully cowed. But what I was actually doing was building a file. Each time she overstepped her authority and I complied, I was creating a documented, undeniable record of her harassment and the HOA's illegal extraction of funds from a non-member. I was giving her the rope, and she was diligently, enthusiastically weaving her own noose. The access lane was the final piece. It had always been a point of contention for her. She hated that it was uncontrolled. She hated that it was on my land, a little piece of the map she couldn't color in with her authority. For years I had allowed my neighbors to use it. When the subdivision was first built, the developer had planned a second exit onto Ridge Road. But the county denied the permit due to wetland preservation. The result was that the dozen homes on the west side of the development had to drive all the way through the neighborhood to get out. My lane saved them 10 minutes. It was an informal kindness, a handshake agreement with the original homeowners. But Eleanor saw it as a flaw in her perfect, ordered world. A loose thread she needed to snip, or rather weave, into her own tapestry. So when I walked back into my house that morning, the smell of asphalt clinging to the air, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel panic. I felt a sense of calm, focused clarity. The game had changed. She had escalated from petty, unenforceable fines to the physical seizure and alteration of my private property. She had crossed a line from administrative overreach to criminal trespass and destruction of property. She had given me the opening I had been patiently waiting for. I went back to my desk and got to work. The first thing I did was call my lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but a man named Ben Carter. Ben's father and I had been friends for 50 years. Ben was a bulldog, a specialist in real estate and property law, who took a particular vicious delight in dismantling corrupt HOA boards. I had sent him my file on Eleanor Vance a year ago, with a note that said, "For when the time comes, Arthur," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I've been wondering when you'd call. Don't tell me. Let me guess. The beige mailbox lady has finally done something you can't ignore. She's paving the north access lane, Ben," I said calmly. "She's on my property, with a full construction crew, as we speak. She told me it's HOA property now and she's setting up a toll." There was a moment of pure, unadulterated silence on the other end of the line. Then, a low whistle. "Oh, she has no idea, does she? She has absolutely no idea. Arthur, this is not a lawsuit. This is a gift. This is a beautifully wrapped, ribbon-adorned, slam-dunk case of everything from trespass to conversion. Did you get it on video?" "Every word," I said. From the moment I walked out until she laughed at me. I transferred the high-definition video file to him while we were on the phone. I could hear him chuckling as he watched it. Her saying, "This is HOA property now," is going to cost her about $50,000 a word, he said with glee. "Okay. Do not engage with her further. Do not speak to her. Do not send her any emails. Let her build her road. Let her install her gate. Let her collect her tolls. We're not just going to get an injunction. We're going to file for damages, legal fees, and the disgorgement of all illegally collected funds. We're going to take every penny she collects, and then we're going to take the money she used to build the road right out of the HOA's operating budget." "That's what I was hoping you'd say," I replied. I'll have a cease and desist and a formal complaint drafted by noon, Ben said. But we're not going to serve it yet. The longer she operates her little toll booth, the deeper the hole she's digging. Let her get comfortable. Wah! Let her cash the checks. In the meantime, I want you to call Frank. Frank was Frank Peterson, a surveyor I had worked with for 30 years. He was retired now too, but his mind was as sharp as the point of a brand new survey stake. He was the best in the business. If there was a misplaced boundary marker or conflicting deed description within a 100-mile radius, Frank knew its history. My next call was to him. Frank, I said, I need a favor. I need a full boundary survey of my North Platte, and I need it staked out with witness posts every 50 feet. I also need you to dig up the original subdivision plat for Oak Ridge Estates, filed in 2002. Let me guess. Franca's gravelly voice came through the phone. Your HOA queen finally made her move on the access lane. News traveled fast in a small community. She's paving it as we speak, Frank laughed, a dry, rattling sound. I've been waiting for this. That woman is a menace. She tried to find me last month because the satellite dish on my roof was, and I quote, not in harmony with the woodland aesthetic. I told her to pound sand. I'll be there in an hour. We'll find the original monuments. They're probably buried, but they're there. Steel rebar with a surveyor's cap doesn't just disappear. Her asphalt is just a temporary inconvenience. While I waited for Frank, I retreated to my office. My desk is an old, heavy oak piece that belonged to my father. It's a partner's desk, big enough for 2 people to work opposite each other. Martha used to sit on the other side paying the household bills while I worked on blueprints. Now it was just me. On the right-hand corner sat a single, immaculate file folder. It was thick, nearly 3 inches, and held together by a large rubber band. The tab simply read, Vance. I opened it. Inside was a chronologically ordered, perfectly preserved history of Eleanor's reign. Every fine notice, every certified mail receipt, every canceled check, printouts of emails, minutes from HOA meetings that I had obtained from a disgruntled former board member. I had even cross-referenced her violations with the actual text of the HOA's own governing documents, highlighting in yellow where her actions contradicted the very rules she claimed to be enforcing. In a separate section, I had the full property records for my land, including the original 1958 deed, the tax maps from the county assessor's office, and aerial photographs from the last 60 years, showing the unchanging path of the access lane. It was a monument to meticulous documentation. It was my life's work applied to a personal problem. On paper, I had already won. The real world just needed to catch up. Frank arrived, exactly when he said he would, Ember. He was a tall, lanky man with a sun-weathered face, and hands that were surprisingly steady. For a man of 75, he unloaded his transit and equipment with practiced efficiency. We walked to the edge of the new asphalt. The construction crew was gone, having finished their work with appalling speed. The road was a stark black ribbon cutting across the autumn landscape. An impressive bit of criminal mischief, Frank muttered, kicking at the edge of the pavement. All right, the original plat map shows the primary monument for your northwest corner is a 1-inch iron pipe. 24 inches down. It should be right about here. He pointed to a spot now covered by at least 6 inches of asphalt. They didn't even bother to do a survey. They just paved over it. Arrogant and stupid. It's a bad combination. For the next 2 hours, Frank worked with a quiet, intense focus. He used my property's southern boundary, which was undisputed and clearly marked, as his baseline. He set up his transit, took readings, and made calculations on a small notepad. He was an artist at work. Finally, he drove a small pilot drill into the asphalt at the spot he had identified. It spun for a moment, then stopped with a distinct metallic clink. "There you are, you old son of a gun," Frank said with a grin. He pulled out the drill. He had hit the iron pipe dead center. "She can't argue with that. Let's mark it." We spent the rest of the day marking the entire boundary line. Every 50 feet, Frank would drive a tall wooden stake, flagged with bright orange ribbon, exactly on the property line. When we were done, there was a perfect, straight line of stakes running down the middle of Eleanor's new road. The visual was stark and undeniable. Half the road was on my side of the stakes, half on the other. It was a declaration of fact written on the landscape itself. While we were working, a few of the neighbors who used the lane came out. One of them was an older woman named Mrs. Gable. Why? She had lived in her house for 15 years, and had been a frequent target of Eleanor's petty tyrannies. She looked at the stakes, then at me. Her expression worried. "Arthur, what's going on?" she asked. She said, "This is a new toll road. We have to pay $60 a month for a transponder to use it." "She's mistaken about who owns the road, Martha," I said gently. "We're just clarifying the property line." Mrs. Gable wrung her hands. "She's a bully, Arthur. Last year she tried to fine me because my cat was sitting on my own porch. She said it was an unrestrained pet in a common area. My porch? Be careful. She'll come after you with everything she has." "I'm counting on it," I said. The next morning, a shiny new aluminum gate was installed at the entrance to the lane from Ridge Road. A large, professionally printed sign was erected next to it. It read, "Private property of OAK, RI, G, E, States, HOA, registered, transponders, only. Violators will be towed and prosecuted." By the end of the week, I saw the little transponder stickers appearing on the windshields of my neighbors' cars. Through Ben, I learned that 10 of the 12 affected households had already paid the first month's fee and a transponder activation charge. Eleanor had collected in her first week of operation nearly $1,000. Every dollar was another nail in her coffin. We let it continue for 3 full weeks. Ben's strategy was simple. We wanted to establish a clear pattern of behavior. We wanted to show that this was not a mistake or a misunderstanding about a boundary line. This was a deliberate, calculated act of seizure and extortion. We let the HOA collect the money. We let them send out official-looking invoices. We let Eleanor hold a small ribbon-cutting ceremony, complete with a photo in the local newspaper's community section. She had no idea that a copy of that newspaper was now the first page in a new exhibit for our lawsuit. During this time, Ben uncovered the bombshell. It was buried in the fine print of the original incorporation documents for the Oak Ridge Estates HOA. The very documents I had helped the original developer draft 25 years ago. The developer, a man named Jim Walters, was a friend of mine. He had wanted to ensure the HOA he was creating would never fall into the hands of a petty tyrant. So at my suggestion, we had inserted a very specific clause into the master deed. The clause, Article XI Section 4, stipulated that any capital improvement project exceeding $5,000 in cost required a vote of no less than 2/3 of the total membership of the association. Not just the board, but every single homeowner. It also required that 3 separate bids from licensed contractors be obtained and made public to the membership at least 30 days prior to the vote. Ben called me, barely able to contain his excitement. "Did she hold a community vote for this road, Arthur?" "Absolutely not," I said. "She announced it at a board meeting as a board-approved discretionary maintenance project." "And did she get 3 bids?" "I doubt she got 1. The contractor she used is her brother-in-law's company." I checked. Ben was practically purring. "So, not only did she seize your land, she did it by violating the most fundamental financial controls in her own governing documents. The contract is void. The expenditure was illegal. She made the entire HOA board complicit in fraud. Arthur, we're not just getting your land back. We're going to get that board dissolved. This was the bombshell discovery. Eleanor, in her rush to consolidate power, had never bothered to actually read the fine print of the documents that gave her that power. She had operated based on her own interpretation of the rules, a classic mistake of the incurious tyrant. She assumed the paper was on her side. She never thought to check. The final piece of preparation came from an unexpected source. A young man on the HOA board named David Shen contacted me. He was an accountant, and he had been on the board for a year, initially believing in Eleanor's vision of an orderly community. He was now thoroughly disillusioned. "Mr. Miller," he said, his voice low and nervous when he called me. "I can't do this anymore. She's running the HOA like a personal piggy bank. She paid her brother-in-law's company $65,000 for that paving job. That's twice what it should have cost. There were no other bids. When I questioned it in the board meeting, she told me I was being uncooperative and threatened to have me removed." David, the disillusioned insider, had reached his breaking point. He had been keeping his own records. He anonymously forwarded me the internal financial statements for the HOA, the invoice from the paving company, and the minutes from the board meeting where he had raised his objections. Minutes that Eleanor had later altered to remove his dissent. He was afraid of her, but he was more afraid of being complicit in what he knew was illegal. With David's information, Ben's legal strategy, and Frank's survey, my file was complete. It was no longer just a folder. It was a weapon. It was a precise, undeniable, and utterly devastating chronicle of Eleanor Vance's malfeasance. We had everything we needed. It was time to act. The first official move was not a lawsuit. It was simpler. I filed a police report for trespassing and destruction of property. I specifically requested that a sheriff's deputy come to my property to take the report. Mosque. The next afternoon, a young, professional-looking deputy named Millerand Relation arrived at my house. I invited him in and laid out the core documents on my dining room table: the deed to my property, Frank's new survey map, and a photograph of the lane before it was paved. I explained the situation calmly and factually. I did not raise my voice. I did not use inflammatory language. I just presented the facts. "So the new road is built half on your land," Deputy Miller summarized, looking at the survey. "That's correct," I said. "And the HOA is now charging a fee for my neighbors to use my own property." He nodded slowly. "This is a civil matter, Mr. Miller. You'll need to take it to court. But I can certainly take a report for the property damage." "I understand," I said. "There's one more thing. I'd like you to accompany me while I speak with the HOA president. I want to formally inform her that she is trespassing. I want that documented in your report." The deputy was hesitant, but it was a reasonable request. "All right," he said. "Let's go have a chat." We walked over to Eleanor's house, a large, ostentatious McMansion at the end of the cul-de-sac. As we approached, I could see her watching us through her large picture window. She opened the door before we even reached the porch, a look of theatrical outrage already plastered on her face. "Can I help you, officer?" she asked, her voice dripping with false concern. She completely ignored me. "Ma'am, I'm Deputy Miller. I'm here because this gentleman, Mr. Arthur Miller, has filed a report regarding damage to his property." Eleanor burst into a short, sharp laugh. "Oh, for heaven's sake, this is about the community access road, isn't it, Arthur? I told you, the matter is settled. The road is HOA property." She turned her full attention to the deputy, her voice shifting into a tone of pained reasonability. "Officer, I am the president of the Homeowners Association." This man is a disgruntled resident. Well, not even a resident. He's an adjacent property owner who is upset about a necessary community improvement. He's been harassing the board for weeks. The deputy maintained a professional, neutral expression. Mr. Miller has a deed and a fresh survey map that indicates half of that new road is on his property, ma'am. This is where her performance truly began. Her eyes widened. She placed a hand on her chest as if wounded. A survey? That's absurd. That path has been used by this community for decades. It's a prescriptive easement. He's trying to extort the HOA, trying to block progress for his own selfish reasons. He's the one who is harassing us. I remained silent, standing a few feet behind the deputy. I let her talk. I let her build her narrative of victimhood. I let her commit her version of events to the memory of a law enforcement officer. Ma'am, I'm not here to adjudicate a property dispute, the deputy said, his patience clearly wearing thin. Mr. Miller is simply formally notifying you that you and the HOA are, according to his documentation, trespassing on his land. He is asking you to cease and desist. Cease and desist, she screeched, her voice rising in pitch. We just spent $65,000 improving that road for the good of this community. I have a fiduciary duty to the homeowners. I will not be intimidated by this old man and his fraudulent maps. Officer, I want him to leave my property immediately. In fact, I think I'd like to file a complaint against him for harassment. The deputy sighed, a small, almost imperceptible exhalation of breath. He turned to me. Ah, Mr. Miller, I think you've made your point. It will be in my report that you officially informed Mr. Vance of your position on this date. I nodded. Thank you, Deputy. That's all I needed. I would like a copy of that report, please. As we walked away, Eleanor was still shouting from her doorway about lawsuits and harassment and her powerful friends in the county government. The deputy glanced at me. Good luck in court, Mr. Miller, he said, a note of what sounded like genuine sympathy in his voice. For what it's worth, you might want to get a restraining order. I don't think that will be necessary, I replied. She's done all the work for me. The police report, with Eleanor's hysterical, on-the-record denials and false accusations, was now a public document. It was another brick in the wall of evidence. The confrontation with the deputy pushed Eleanor over the edge. Her confidence, which had been absolute, was now tinged with a frantic, aggressive energy. She saw my quiet, procedural actions not as a legal process, but as a personal war. And she intended to win it through sheer escalation. The next day, every resident in the development received a special notice from the HOA, drafted and signed by Eleanor. It was a masterpiece of propaganda. It painted me as a greedy, antisocial recluse who was trying to hold the community hostage. It claimed I had produced falsified documents in an attempt to extort money from the hard-working families of Oak Ridge. It announced an emergency community defense fund and a special assessment of $100 per household to finance the coming legal battle against my frivolous claims. She was using the HOA's funds to fight a battle she had started by illegally seizing my land. It was a bold, reckless move. It was also exactly what Ben had predicted she would do. The notice, however, had an unintended effect. While it galvanized her supporters, it also fractured the community. People who had been quietly resentful of her reign were now being forced to pay for her personal vendetta. The fearful allies began to emerge from the woodwork. The first was Mrs. Gable. She came to my door that evening, clutching Eleanor's notice in her hand. Her face was pale. "Arthur," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "This has gone too far. She can't do this." She handed me a small digital voice recorder. I was the board secretary for a year, before she forced me out. She didn't know I kept copies of the original meeting recordings. The one from last month. The one where David Chen questioned the paving contract. She edited the official minutes, but I have the original audio. You can hear her threaten him. You can hear her admit there were no other bids. Gable's recording was the missing link. David Chen's documents showed the financial malfeasance, but the audio was proof of Eleonora's intent and her efforts to conceal it. It was the voice of a tyrant, caught in the act of suppressing dissent. I thanked her, my heart filled with a quiet gratitude for her courage. She represented the conscience of the community, the quiet majority who had been silenced for too long. The coalition was forming. David Chen, Mrs. Gable, and now 2 other former board members who had been pushed out by Eleanor, all agreed to provide affidavits. They had their own stories, their own files, of petty fines and public humiliations. My personal dispute was becoming a class action in spirit, if not in legal fact. I was no longer just fighting for my land, I was the focal point for a community correction. Eleanor's final escalation was both desperate and, for our case, incredibly helpful. 2 days before the scheduled court date for our injunction hearing, I was served with a temporary restraining order. She had gone to a judge. Ex parte meeting without me. Presentan claimed that I was a threat to her safety. Her petition was filled with wild, unsubstantiated fabrications. She claimed I had threatened her, that I had sabotaged the new gate, that I was stalking her. She used the deputy's visit as proof of my escalating campaign of harassment. The order stipulated that I was to stay at least 500 feet away from her and her property, which effectively barred me from accessing the northern half of my own land, including the disputed road. She lied to a judge, Arthur. She filed a perjured statement to gain a legal advantage. This is no longer a civil dispute. She has committed a crime. We're going to present this at the injunction hearing. The judge is not going to be pleased. The restraining order was her last, desperate throw of the dice. It was an act intended to crush me, to paint me as the villain just before we stepped into court. But like everything else she had done, it was a performance without substance. She had no idea that her sworn statement was about to be contradicted by a mountain of meticulously organized, undeniable evidence. She had no idea she had just handed us the perfect ending to our presentation. The day of the injunction hearing arrived. The courtroom was small and stuffy, smelling of old paper and stale coffee. It was not a full trial, just a hearing to determine if the judge should grant our request for a temporary injunction to force the HOA to remove the gate and cease using my road until the full case could be heard. But in practice, these hearings often decide the entire outcome. The side that presents the most credible case usually wins. The room was divided. On one side sat Eleanor, flanked by her lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, and 2 loyal HOA board members. They looked confident, whispering to each other and smiling. On the other side sat Ben and me. Behind us were Mrs. Bream, Gable, David Chen, and a half-dozen other residents from Oak Ridge. A quiet but visible show of support. Eleanor's lawyer went first. He was a performer, just like his client. He paced in front of the judge's bench, his voice booming with righteous indignation. He spoke of community rights, of prescriptive easements, and of my campaign of intimidation against a dedicated public servant like his client, Eleanor Vance. He presented the restraining order as Exhibit A, painting me as an unstable and aggressive man. He presented photos of the beautiful new road, a testament to the HOA's commitment to progress. His argument was all emotion, all performance. It was compelling, if you didn't know any of the facts. Then it was Ben's turn. He did not pace. He did not raise his voice. He walked to the lectern, placed a single thick binder on its surface, and turned to the judge. "Your Honor," he began, his voice calm and methodical. We are here today because the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, under the direction of its president, Eleanor Vance, has illegally seized, paved, and monetized the private property of my client, Mr. Arthur Miller, heir. For the next 30 minutes, Ben dismantled their entire narrative piece by piece. He did not use rhetoric. He used evidence. He began by placing Frank's certified survey map on the projector. Your Honor, this is the survey plat, filed with the county. As you can see, the property line is clear. The road in question is, without dispute, on my client's land. Next, he showed the deed. This is the deed to Mr. Miller's property, recorded in 1958. There are no easements, prescriptive or otherwise, granted to the Oak Ridge HOA or any other entity for the land in question. He then played a short clip from the video I had taken on my phone. The courtroom was silent as Eleanor's voice filled the space. "This is HOA property now," she said, her image clear on the screen. Ben continued, his pace deliberate. He presented the canceled checks and fine notices, showing the pattern of the HOA illegally extracting money from my client for years. He presented the financial documents provided by David Shen, showing the outrageous cost of the road and the lack of proper bidding. He introduced David's affidavit, which stated that Eleanor had ignored the board's own financial controls. "Your Honor," Ben said, "Mrs. Vance did not have the authority to approve this expenditure, even if it had been on HOA property. She violated Article XA, Section 4 of the HOA's own master deed, which requires a 2/3 vote of the entire membership for any capital improvement over $5,000. This was a $65,000 project. No such vote was ever held." Eleanor's lawyer was on his feet objecting. "Your Honor, this is a matter for the HOA's internal governance, not this court." The judge waved him down. "It speaks to the defendant's pattern of behavior, counselor. Sit down." The collapse began slowly. I watched Eleanor's face. The confident, imperious mask was beginning to crack. A small line of tension appeared between her eyebrows. Her smile was gone, replaced by a tight, thin line. The final blow was twofold. First, Ben introduced the audio recording from Mrs. Gable. He played the part where David Shen questions the contract, and Eleanor's sharp, dismissive voice cuts him off. "The board doesn't need to approve my decisions, David. I am the president. The decision is final." The judge listened intently, his expression grim. Then, Ben picked up the temporary restraining order she had filed against me. And finally, "Your Honor, we have this document. A sworn statement in which Ms. Vance claims my client is harassing and threatening her. A statement she used to convince a court to restrict my client's access to his own home. A statement that stands in stark contrast to all the documented evidence we have presented today, which shows a consistent, one-way pattern of harassment and aggression from Ms. Vance against my client." Ben paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the silent room. "We are asking for the injunction, Your Honor. We are also asking that you dissolve the baseless restraining order against my client. And we will be filing a motion for sanctions against both Ms. Vance and her counsel for filing a perjured affidavit and abusing the court's process." That was the moment. The turning point. The mask didn't just crack, it shattered. Eleanor Vance went perfectly still. The color drained from her face. Her eyes, which had been darting between Ben and the judge, now stared blankly at the thick binder on the lectern. In that moment, she finally understood. She realized that this wasn't a battle of wills or a performance to be won. It was a matter of fact of paper, of rules she had never bothered to learn. She realized that every action she had taken, every threat she had made, every document she had signed, had not been a step toward victory, but a step into a meticulously prepared trap. She had no idea, and now she did. The judge did not take long to make his decision. He looked at Eleanor, his face a mask of cold disapproval. "Ma'am," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "I have seen a great many property disputes in my time on this bench, but I have rarely seen such a flagrant, arrogant, and frankly illegal seizure of private land. The injunction is granted, effective immediately. The HOA will cease and desist all use of Mr. Miller's property. The gate and any other obstructions are to be removed at the HOA's expense within 48 hours. The temporary restraining order against Mr. Miller is dissolved. And counsel," he said, turning his glare on Eleanor's lawyer, "you and I will have a conversation in my chambers about Rule 11 sanctions for filing frivolous and fraudulent documents in my court. Now, get out of my courtroom." The verdict was a quiet explosion. Eleanor didn't move. She just sat there, staring into space, as her lawyer frantically whispered in her ear. Our side was silent. There was no cheering, no celebration. Just a collective, quiet exhale of relief. Justice, when it finally arrives, is often a very somber affair. The aftermath was swift and total. The gate was gone the next day. A crew from a different company, and not her brother-in-law, came and sawed a neat line down the middle of the asphalt, removing the half that was on my property and leaving a comical, on-lane road to nowhere. The legal battle that followed was short. Faced with the mountain of evidence, the HOA's insurance company quickly settled. The terms of the settlement were devastating for Eleanor. The HOA was forced to pay for the removal of the asphalt and the restoration of my land to its original condition. They were forced to pay my legal fees in their entirety. But Ben had added one final beautiful stipulation. The court ordered a full disgorgement of all illegally collected funds, every penny of the toll money, every dollar from the Community Defense Fund, had to be paid back to the homeowners. A check was issued from the HOA to my lawyer's trust account, and from there, every resident who had paid got a full refund, with interest. The money she had collected to fight me was used to pay me, But the consequences for Eleanor went far beyond financial. The revelation of her actions in court, particularly the perjured restraining order and the financial malfeasance with the paving contract, triggered a full-blown rebellion within the HOA. A special meeting was called. David Chen, no longer afraid, presented the evidence of her self-dealing and rule-breaking to the entire community. She was recalled as president by a near-unanimous vote. The rest of her board resigned in disgrace. The local prosecutor, prompted by the judge's scathing remarks, opened an investigation. She was charged with perjury for the restraining order affidavit. Faced with jail time, she pleaded guilty to a lesser misdemeanor, paid a hefty fine, and was sentenced to 200 hours of community service. The humiliation was absolute. The community began to heal. A new board was elected, with David Chen as the treasurer, and Mrs. Gable as the secretary. Their first act was to conduct a full audit of the HOA's finances under Eleanor's reign. They rescinded dozens of her ridiculous rules, and refunded thousands of dollars in improper fines she had levied over the years. The beige mailbox posts were repainted in a variety of colors. Mr. Henderson's rooster weather vane was returned to its rightful place on his barn. A sense of normalcy, of quiet neighborliness, returned to Oak Ridge. The neighbors started using the access lane again, now that it was back to its simple gravel state. They would wave as they went by, a small gesture of thanks and camaraderie that had been absent for years. 6 months after the court hearing, a for-sale sign appeared in Eleanor Vance's yard. She sold the house at a loss and moved away. I never saw her again. Her name became a cautionary tale, a local legend about the dangers of unchecked ego. Last week, I was sitting on my porch, much like I was that first morning, with a cup of coffee in my hand. The autumn air was crisp again. The gravel on the access lane crunched under the tires of Mrs. Gable's car as she drove past, giving me a friendly wave. The line of bright orange survey stakes was gone now, but I knew exactly where the boundary was. I didn't need to see it. I thought about the whole affair, about the thick file folder that now sat at the back of my filing cabinet. Its purpose served. It was never about the victory. Not really. Triumphant joy was not the emotion I felt. It was more a sense of tired satisfaction, like finishing a long and complex engineering project. It was the quiet pleasure of seeing a system function as it was designed to, of seeing order restored from chaos. Ownership is a strange concept. ADA's not just a name on a piece of paper or a line on a map. ADA's a responsibility. ADA's the stewardship of a small piece of the world. Eleanor believed ownership was about control, about power, about bending the world to her will. She was wrong. True ownership is about understanding the rules, respecting the boundaries, and honoring the history written in the land itself. She had tried to pave over that history, to write her own story in asphalt and intimidation. But the truth, like the Iron Survey Monument, buried deep in the earth, was still there, waiting. All I had to do was find it, mark it for everyone to see, and let the facts speak for themselves. On paper, and now in reality, the matter was, and remains, settled. The peace was restored. And my coffee, this morning, tasted exceptionally good.